I always thought Christmas was the one time of year no family could turn each other away. No matter the fights, the distance, the grudges, Christmas was sacred. At least, that's what I believed for over 60 years of my life. So when my son, Michael, told me I wasn't welcome at his house this Christmas, I laughed at first. I thought he was joking. A cruel joke, sure, but still, what else could it be? I'd cooked for him every year since he was a child, filled our home with the smell of roasted turkey, stuffing, and Maria's favorite pies. I'd kept the traditions alive, even after my wife passed. And now, suddenly, I wasn't welcome? The living room looked warm, festive, and rich. Isabella, his wife, had decorated every inch of the place with expensive touches. Velvet stockings by the fireplace, a 12-foot Christmas tree glittering with ornaments that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and the scent of some fancy vanilla candle drifting through the air. Everything screamed perfection, but it felt cold, artificial. I shifted on their leather couch, the one I'd helped him buy last spring when Isabella decided their old furniture wasn't sophisticated enough. Trying to lighten the mood, I said, "I could make my turkey this year, the one with sage stuffing your mom loved so much. Remember how she always said it tasted better than her grandmother's?" The words hung there, but Michael's shoulders stiffened. He looked down, twisting his wedding ring, unable to meet my eyes. "Dad," his voice cracked a little, "you won't be welcome here this Christmas." I blinked, waiting for him to laugh, to tell me this was all some terrible mistake. But he didn't. "What do you mean I won't be welcome? This is your home. My home too, in a way. Why wouldn't I be here?" Michael's gaze dropped to the marble coffee table. Another thing I'd helped him pick out. Another thing my money had bought. His voice grew smaller with every word. "Isabella's parents are coming. They'd prefer if you weren't here." They'd prefer. The words cut deeper than any insult I had ever received. I looked around the room at the silk curtains I'd paid for, the hardwood floors that came from my second mortgage, the crown molding that maxed out my credit card. Every inch of this house carried the weight of my sacrifices, my fingerprints, my love. "Their own way?" I repeated slowly. "And what way is that, Michael?" "Dad, please, don't make this harder." He glanced toward the kitchen, where Isabella's shiny new $2,000 mixer sat on the counter. Another gift from me for one of her 3-week holiday baking phases. "Where will I spend Christmas, then?" I asked quietly. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. He shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe with Aunt Rosa, or maybe we could do something the weekend after." The weekend after, as if Christmas could be rescheduled like a dentist appointment. I stood, my knees aching as though they carried not just my body, but the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made for him. "I see." I walked toward the door, past the family photos lining the wall. Each one told a silent story, my face shrinking, fading, until I was nothing more than a background figure in their picture-perfect life. My hand touched the doorknob, cold, solid, final. Without turning back, I said, "Tell Isabella's parents, Feliz Navidad." The December night slapped me across the face as I stepped outside. Behind me, Michael called my name once, then I heard the click of the door closing. That sound told me more than any words could ever tell. I climbed into my truck, sat in silence, and stared at the glowing houses where families gathered without question, without conditions. My phone buzzed. Michael, no doubt, already trying to smooth things over with guilt-laced excuses. I ignored it. I turned the key and drove away, leaving behind the warmth of a house I'd helped build, but would never belong in. As the streets of Spokane stretched before me, memories clawed at my chest. A young father loading gifts into his car, children pressing excited faces to the window. That had been us once, me and Michael. Before Isabella, before I became just a wallet with inconvenient emotions. The red light at 29th and Grand glared at me like judgment. $2,800 a month. 5 years. The numbers rattled in my head. $140,000. More money than Maria and I had ever saved for retirement. All of it gone. And for what? For them to tell me I wasn't welcome? The light turned green. My truck roared forward, carrying me not just through the streets, but into something darker, something colder, something that whispered, "Enough is enough." And that was the moment I knew this Christmas would be different. I drove home that December night with a storm brewing in my chest. Spokane's streets were nearly empty, the kind of quiet that pressed in on you and made every thought louder, every memory sharper. My house smelled faintly of pine from the small tree I'd kept up, a little reminder of Maria's tradition. But tonight, even that familiar scent couldn't comfort me. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, staring at the empty seat across from me. That seat had once held Michael, chattering about school, sports, life. Now it was just a hollow reminder of what had been lost. And yet, as I stared at that empty chair, an idea began to take shape, a slow, deliberate kind of fire. It started small, just thoughts. They think they can humiliate me? They think they can take my money and my loyalty and still keep me silent? They're wrong. By morning, those thoughts had hardened into a plan, a way to make them see, to make them feel the truth of every sacrifice they had taken for granted. But not in anger, not in petty revenge. This had to be precise, surgical, and undeniable. I would show them what it meant to cross someone who had spent a lifetime building, planning, and observing. I pulled out my laptop. The screen glowed like a spotlight on the stage I was about to claim. Cody Jenkins, Catherine Jenkins, Isabella Flores. Each name typed carefully. Each social media account analyzed. Facebook posts, Instagram stories, LinkedIn connections. Every public detail they had shared, every curated image of wealth and privilege, every brag about vacations and expensive dinners. I cataloged it all. Cody, retired bank manager, country club member, man of influence. Catherine, the poster child of elegance and charity, her followers praising every curated moment. Isabella, blissfully unaware, flaunting a life paid for by someone else. And Michael, my own son, caught in the middle of entitlement and ignorance. For 3 days, I disappeared from the world I had known. No phone calls, no errands, no distractions. I lived in spreadsheets, screenshots, and careful notes. My kitchen table became command central, my laptop a weapon, my mind a strategist's battlefield. I plotted, organized, and prepared. 7 days to Christmas, and each one counted. December 18th was circled in my wall calendar, but not for celebration. It was a countdown to justice. Every payment I had made over 5 years, the mortgage, the down payment, the renovations, the utilities, the luxuries I had funded, was now a line in the story they'd never see coming. I highlighted amounts, annotated dates, traced patterns. Every email, every bank statement, every receipt, evidence of their reliance, their hypocrisy, their lies. I checked my social media again. Each post from Isabella boasting about hosting, each snapshot of gifts and decorations, each tag from friends praising their elegance, it all became ammunition. And then there was the newspaper article, the hit piece they had orchestrated to paint me as unstable, as some bitter, failing old man. That had been their biggest mistake. They went public with their lies, not realizing I now had the proof to go public with the truth. I printed everything. Copies for each dinner guest, meticulously arranged. Bank statements, receipts, social media screenshots, the newspaper article with my handwritten notes. Each stack a testament to 5 years of sacrifice they'd ignored. Each page a mirror reflecting the arrogance they had taken for granted. I dressed carefully that morning in my navy suit, the one that I had worn to Maria's funeral, the one that had been pressed, ready for grief. Now it was pressed, ready for confrontation. I loaded my briefcase with the evidence, my heart pounding with anticipation. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about showing them that the man they'd underestimated had the power to command the room, not through threats, but through truth. As I drove to Kendall Yards, the neighborhood glowed with holiday cheer. Cars lined the streets, laughter spilling from open windows, the smell of pine and baked goods filling the night air. I parked across from their house, my briefcase heavy with the weight of what I was about to deliver. The front door was unlocked, the perfect signal that their sense of security was misplaced. Isabella's obsession with appearances had blinded her to reality. With a deep breath, I stepped inside, feeling the warmth of their home and the cold injustice of exclusion. Tonight, the Christmas they had planned would meet the truth I had prepared, and there would be no escaping it. December 19th dawned gray and cold, the kind of Spokane winter day that made even the strongest coats feel inadequate. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming in my mug, laptop open and spreadsheets glowing like battlefield maps. The plan was no longer just an idea, it was a strategy, meticulously crafted down to the hour. 7 days until Christmas, 7 days until justice. I began with a list: Cody Jenkins, Catherine Jenkins, Isabella Flores, Michael Flores. I cataloged every post, every picture, every status update. Instagram photos from luxury vacations, Facebook check-ins at restaurants I had paid for, LinkedIn connections that exposed the network behind their media attack. The narcissism was breathtaking. They flaunted my money, my generosity, as if it were their own. Every detail became a weapon, a thread I could pull to unravel the facade they had built. Cody's career, carefully curated, had always projected competence and influence, but he had underestimated one thing: me. For decades, I had observed, calculated, and planned, not for power, not for glory, but to survive. And now, survival meant something very different. I wasn't the broken old man they thought I was. I was Dennis Flores, strategist, businessman, and orchestrator of a reckoning. I spent hours creating evidence packets. Bank statements highlighting $2,800 mortgage payments each month, receipts for the $47,000 down payment on their home, documentation of the $18,000 kitchen renovation, photos of furniture, appliances, decorations, all purchased with my money. Each document was carefully annotated, notes in red pen pointing out lies, hypocrisy, and entitlement. I made 12 copies for the dinner guests, 12 witnesses who would see the truth firsthand. Meanwhile, Isabella continued her social media theater, unaware that each post was now fuel for the fire I was building. "Can't wait for Christmas dinner with family," she wrote, tagging friends, bragging about hosting. Our hosting skills, I thought bitterly, our money, our sacrifice. The newspaper article planted by Cody's connections had been the spark, but their public life provided the perfect kindling for the flames. By December 21st, my briefcase was packed, each folder like a loaded gun, ready to fire in evidence. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would move around the room, where each packet would be placed. The element of timing was crucial. Guests would be seated, mid-dinner, relaxed and unsuspecting. That's when the truth would hit them like a sledgehammer. I thought of Michael, my son. He had been caught between loyalty and entitlement, manipulated by his wife's family. I didn't want to humiliate him, only to awaken him to reality. He needed to understand the cost of ignorance, the cost of pride, and the value of respect. December 22nd and 23rd were spent double-checking details, every payment recorded, every post cross-referenced, every newspaper quote verified. The packets had to be flawless. One error, one missing detail, and the plan would crumble. I even mapped out the dining room in my head. 12 guests, each with a packet placed strategically in front of them. Their reactions would be a symphony of shock, confusion, and finally, understanding. On the morning of December 24th, I dressed in my navy suit, crisp and sharp, the one I had worn to Maria's funeral. This was a different kind of ceremony, a funeral for lies, hypocrisy, and disrespect. I loaded the briefcase into my car and drove to Kendall Yards, each block bringing me closer to the moment of reckoning. The glow from their home spilled into the night, warmth and cheer masking the deception inside. The front door was unlocked, a perfect oversight. They had spent so much energy projecting safety and success that they had ignored the simplest truth. Appearances are fragile. I stepped inside, feeling the warmth of their home and the cold justice waiting to unfold. This was my moment, the moment to take back dignity, to show what it meant to be underestimated, and to make sure they would never forget the man they had tried to humiliate. By the time dinner began, I had rehearsed every step, every phrase, every gesture. The countdown was over. 7 days of planning, 7 days of preparation, 7 days to turn the tables. Tonight, Cody, Catherine, Isabella, and Michael would all learn a lesson they would carry forever. And the rest of the world, the 12 unsuspecting guests, would witness it. The war had begun.
December 24th evening arrived with a sky so gray it seemed to mirror the tension I carried in my chest. I parked across the street from their house, briefcase in hand, each heartbeat a drum of anticipation. Inside, laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the air. 12 people, oblivious to the storm about to descend upon their perfect little world. I entered quietly, the warm air hitting my face, carrying the smells of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and expensive wine. Isabella's voice floated from the dining room. "Darling, that's not how we usually do things," followed by polite laughter. Their perfection, their curated lives, their smug satisfaction, it was all about to unravel. "Good evening, everyone," I said calmly, stepping into the dining room. Heads turned, glasses paused midair. Surprise flickered across faces, followed by confusion, and finally a trace of fear. Isabella froze, wine halfway to her lips. Michael's confident posture crumbled into unease. Cody and Catherine looked as if they'd seen a ghost. "I hope you don't mind me joining your Christmas celebration," I continued, setting the briefcase on the marble sideboard. Isabella's voice rose first. "Darling, that's not how we usually do things," followed by polite laughter. Their perfection, their curated lives, their smug satisfaction, it was all about to unravel. "I think your guests deserve to know the truth." I began placing the packets in front of each guest. Bank statements, receipts, photos, social media prints, all carefully annotated. 5 years of financial support, $168,000 in mortgage payments alone, plus down payments, renovations, furniture, appliances. Everything you see here was funded by me. The room went silent. The rustling of papers sounded like gunfire in a cathedral. Faces shifted as the evidence sank in. Comments of shock, disbelief, and anger began to ripple through the dinner guests.
"This is outrageous," one elderly woman whispered, eyes scanning a highlighted mortgage payment. Another muttered, "I can't believe they never told us." Isabella attempted control. "It's more complicated than it looks. Dennis volunteered." "Actually," I said, holding up a printed copy of the newspaper article, "it's exactly as it looks. You called me unstable, erratic, and dangerous while taking everything I gave you and flaunting it." I moved from guest to guest, tapping key sections, ensuring every eye saw the timeline of generosity, manipulation, and deceit. Cody's face went from red to ashen. Catherine's wineglass trembled in her hand. The truth didn't just land, it exploded. Michael, who had remained quiet, whispered, "Dad, I didn't know about the newspaper." "Your wife knew it, and her parents orchestrated it. They painted me the villain to cover their greed." The guests began exchanging glances, whispers turning into low murmurs of disbelief. One woman in pearls shook her head. "Cody, how could you let this happen? All these years of deceit, financial exploitation, humiliation, while smiling to our faces." Cody stammered, "You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," the woman interrupted, voice firm. "This man supported your family financially while you treated him like hired help. Then, when he refused to continue being your ATM, you tried to destroy his reputation publicly." Catherine tried to deny. "He abandoned us at the airport." "You never said what?" I pressed, pulling screenshots from Isabella's social media where she had mocked me, belittled my heritage, my working-class background. The guests gasped at each post. The laughter from earlier evaporated like mist. Isabella's composure cracked. This is a family matter." "No," I said firmly, voice carrying through the room. "This stopped being a family matter when you decided to attack me publicly. Tonight, your guests, the people you trust, are seeing the truth." Cody opened his mouth, then closed it, powerless. Catherine clutched her chair arms, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Michael looked down, shame washing over his features. The temperature in the room had shifted. The illusion of wealth, sophistication, and control had collapsed. I watched the carefully constructed social facade crumble, brick by brick. The silence, punctuated only by shuffling papers and whispered exclamations, was more satisfying than any holiday celebration I had ever known. "I am sorry to interrupt your dinner, but I think your guests deserve to know the truth. I hope you can understand why I felt compelled to bring this to light." And with that, I walked toward the door. Behind me, the eruption began. Voices raised, accusations flew, the reality of years of entitlement and lies finally hitting every guest. Outside, the Spokane winter night welcomed me back. Cold, gray, but alive with the electricity of victory. The war had reached its crescendo. Justice, not revenge, had been served. Tonight, they had learned what happens when you underestimate a man who refuses to be a doormat any longer. The silence of the night outside contrasted sharply with the storm I'd left behind in Kendall Yards. Driving home, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. My phone buzzed with missed calls and messages. Isabella, Michael, Cody, even Catherine. But I ignored them all. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. It was about reclaiming control over my own life. By the time I reached my modest home, the lights of Spokane twinkled like a distant constellation. Inside, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, sitting in my recliner and letting the warm burn settle into my chest. For years, I had been invisible in my own family's eyes, taken for granted, treated like a shadow that could be ignored. Tonight, That had changed. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Meanwhile, back at their house, the scene had erupted into chaos. Guests whispered among themselves, astonishment and anger intermingling. Isabella's attempts at explanation fell on deaf ears. Cody and Catherine were shell-shocked, their social image tarnished before the very people whose admiration they had meticulously curated. Michael, however, was silent for a long time. The weight of his choices pressed down on him like never before. Sitting alone in his study, he stared at his hands, shaking. Every Christmas card he had ever sent, every dinner party he had hosted, all seemed meaningless against the backdrop of his father's revelation. He had thought he was doing right by his wife and her family, shielding them from the burden of an old man. Yet in doing so, he had betrayed his own blood. Hours later, after the initial storm subsided, Michael's phone finally rang. Hesitation gripped him before he pressed answer. "Dad?" "I'm listening," I replied calmly. I need to talk about everything." I gestured to the recliner opposite mine. "Sit. Let's start at the beginning." Over the next hour, he confessed everything. How he had been manipulated by Isabella, pressured by her family, convinced that his father's support was a burden he needed to escape. He admitted to turning a blind eye to their extravagant lifestyle, justifying it as helping family. The lies, the arrogance, the entitlement, they had all become excuses for betrayal. I listened, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. The anger I had carried for years had transformed into a quiet authority, the kind that commands respect without demanding it. "Do you understand now, Michael?" I asked when he had finished. "I do, Dad. I see it all now. I don't know how to make this right. The house, the money, everything." I took a sip of whiskey. "You can't fix the past. That money, those years, they're gone. But what you can do is change the future. Stop living for approval. Stop letting others dictate your values. Start with honesty. Start with responsibility." He nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of the lesson. I want to make amends. With you. With myself." "That's a start," I said, voice calm but firm. "But understand this. Respect isn't given because someone apologizes. It's earned through consistent action. If you want a relationship with me, it will have to be built from scratch. No shortcuts, no excuses." Outside, the night was quiet, but inside, a new understanding was forming. Michael had been humbled, but he had also been given a chance, a narrow, hard-won opening to rebuild. I wasn't naive. I knew his journey wouldn't be easy, but it was his choice to take it or let it slip away. The next few days were quiet. I returned to my routines, to the projects and hobbies I had long neglected while trying to appease people who never deserved my loyalty. The phone calls from Isabella and her parents grew frantic, then desperate, then ceased entirely. Their world had shifted irrevocably. And Michael? He began taking tentative steps. He called once a week, sometimes twice, sharing small victories and asking advice, sometimes listening without argument. It was a fragile beginning, but real, and in that I found a measure of peace. Spring began to seep into Spokane, melting the winter's icy grip. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet satisfaction of living life on my own terms, unburdened by manipulation, betrayal, or pretense. The whiskey tasted sweeter, the air felt warmer, and the world seemed, finally, manageable. I glanced at Maria's photo on the mantel, a silent nod to the woman whose memory had shaped me, strengthened me, and guided me through the darkest chapters. And in the distance, the laughter of new friends, of Rosa's family, reminded me that real family is not defined by blood alone. It's defined by love, respect, and mutual care. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I was finally free.
The days after Christmas had passed in a blur of clarity and quiet determination. I spent my mornings tending to the small projects around my house, fixing what had long been neglected, and my evenings planning for the future, not theirs, mine. Michael's calls came less frequently, but each one was more thoughtful, more grounded. I listened as he tried to navigate the consequences of his choices, fumbling at first, but gradually gaining a sense of responsibility that had long eluded him. Meanwhile, word of the Christmas dinner incident spread quietly through the circles that mattered to Cody and Catherine. A few mutual acquaintances who had attended the dinner reached out to me with whispers of astonishment. "I can't believe it," one woman said over coffee, shaking her head. "I never imagined they'd stoop so low after everything." Another, a former business associate of Cody's, remarked, "You've shown remarkable restraint and clarity. I'd be fuming if that happened to me." And fuming they were, in their own ways. Isabella's texts and calls had turned from demands to pleading, then to bitter anger, and eventually stopped entirely. She had lost the comfortable grip she once had over the family's narrative. Cody and Catherine, whose reputations had always been carefully cultivated, now found themselves isolated, unable to defend the lifestyle they had built on my financial support. Michael, however, was learning. Slowly, haltingly, he began taking steps to regain some semblance of independence. The house, the extravagant property he could no longer afford, loomed over him like a reminder of his past misjudgments. He called one evening, voice tight with nervous determination. "Dad, I've been looking at our options. I think selling the house might be best, at least something I can manage without falling behind." I nodded, though over the phone he couldn't see it. "That's a start. You're finally making decisions for yourself instead of relying on others to cover your mistakes." The conversation marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, he arranged meetings with realtors, assessed his finances, and began to understand what it truly meant to live within one's means. The process was humbling. Every expense, every overlooked bill, every indulgence his father had quietly funded over the years came crashing back into focus. He called again, this time with gratitude mingled with frustration. I had no idea it was this much," I replied gently but firmly. "You should have, Michael. Knowledge is power. You can't fix what you don't understand." As Michael worked to correct the financial imbalance, Isabella began to face the fallout in her own way. Her social media profiles, once a carefully curated showcase of refinement and luxury, began to feel hollow. Friends and acquaintances who had attended the infamous Christmas dinner whispered behind closed doors. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. Her sense of control, built on manipulation and pretense, crumbled. Cody and Catherine, too, realized the extent of their isolation. Invitations from business circles dried up. Colleagues who had once admired Cody's supposed savvy now questioned his judgment. For the first time in decades, they experienced the very vulnerability they had tried to impose on me. And me? I watched it all with quiet satisfaction. Not vindictive glee, but a deep, resonant sense of justice. My life was no longer dictated by the expectations of others or by the whims of those who had taken advantage of my kindness. I spent time with people who valued me, shared meals with friends who appreciated my company, and began attending community events without fear of judgment or exclusion. One evening, Rosa texted me inviting me to dinner again. The children wanted to show me their school projects. I smiled,
feeling a warmth that had been absent for too long. Wouldn't miss it, I typed back. Real family, I realized, was about presence, respect, and shared joy, not money, power, or social standing. As I poured myself a glass of whiskey that night, the spring air cool on my skin, I thought about the road ahead. Michael was slowly learning responsibility, Isabella's world was shrinking to the confines of her own mistakes, and Cody and Catherine were left to reckon with the consequences of a life built on entitlement. For the first time in years, I felt fully in control, not of anyone else, but of my own destiny. I'd reclaimed my dignity, my agency, and my peace. The past could not be changed, but the future was mine to shape. And I intended to shape it well.
The first weeks of January brought an unfamiliar calm to my life. Spokane's winter slowly softened, the snow melting into quiet puddles along the sidewalks, and the city seemed almost reflective, as if it too was taking stock of the events of December. I spent my mornings at home, enjoying the small victories of independence, a freshly repaired faucet, a new coat of paint in the living room, and evenings filled with books, quiet music, and meaningful conversations with Rosa and her children. It was simple, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Michael's transformation continued. He called less in panic and more in consultation. "Dad, I met with a realtor today," he said one evening, a cautious optimism in his voice. "We're looking at some smaller properties, nothing extravagant, but manageable." "Good," I said, leaning back in my chair. "That's how you rebuild, one step at a time. Remember, responsibility is a skill, not a punishment." He laughed nervously. "Feels like punishment sometimes." "It's worth it," I replied. "Every choice has a cost. Some just hit harder than others." Back at their household, the ripples of that Christmas dinner continued to spread. Isabella's carefully maintained social media empire began to unravel. Friends, once loyal and flattering, became silent observers, their likes and comments replaced with muted questions or complete absence. Invitations to charity events and wine tastings she once flaunted disappeared from her calendar. She tried calling, emailing, even sending texts, but the responses were polite, formal, and distant. She was learning, slowly and painfully, that influence built on lies and manipulation was fragile at best. Cody and Catherine faced similar consequences. Cody, once a respected figure in local banking circles, discovered that trust could not be restored by mere explanation. His colleagues, who had once admired his savvy business sense, now questioned the decisions he'd made that left him publicly embarrassed and personally compromised. Catherine's charity circles whispered, their polite smiles masking judgment. For once, they experienced the cold isolation that I had endured for years at the hands of entitlement and false pride. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visit from a familiar neighbor who attended the infamous Christmas dinner. "Dennis," she said, her voice hushed with a mix of admiration and curiosity, "I've never seen someone handle betrayal with such dignity. Most people would have lost control entirely." I shrugged, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Dignity isn't something you lose, it's something you claim. People only get to take it if you allow them." Michael's efforts were beginning to show results. The process of downsizing, repaying debts, and regaining control over his finances gave him a sense of agency he had never experienced. He called one evening, his voice steadier than before. "Dad, I sold the house. Not everything went perfectly, but it's done. I feel lighter in a way." I allowed myself a small smile. That's the first step toward being a man who can stand on his own. Good work. Isabella, however, remained trapped in her own illusions.
She reached out one last time, desperate, but I ignored it. Her influence and control had already been diminished, her status slipping through her fingers like sand. She was learning, painfully and belatedly, that life cannot be curated like a social media profile. Real life is measured by accountability, not appearances. As for Cody and Catherine, they faced a slow, relentless exposure to reality. Invitations, respect, and even casual acknowledgement from their peers dwindled. They had underestimated the reach of truth and the consequences of underestimating someone they had tried to suppress. I spent my evenings reflecting on the lessons December had taught me. That patience, strategy, and the courage to confront wrongdoing could restore dignity faster than anger or retaliation. I had reclaimed my peace, my control, and my freedom, and it felt better than any victory that could be bought or borrowed. Spring approached, tentative and fresh, and with it a renewed sense of life and purpose. I realized that family, respect, and loyalty were far more valuable than wealth or social appearances. The past 5 years had been a lesson in patience and resilience, and now I was living the reward. Michael's voice on the phone became warmer, more genuine. "Dad, I don't know if I'll ever fully make up for the past, but thank you for showing me what it means to be responsible." "You're learning," I said simply. "That's what matters." And in that moment, as the last traces of winter faded and the promise of spring filled the air, I knew one thing with certainty. I would never again allow anyone to diminish me, nor would I accept a life built on pretense and falsehoods. My future was mine, and I intended to live it fully, honestly, bravely, and unapologetically. February in Spokane brought a subtle shift in the air, a lingering chill mixed with the faint scent of thawing snow. But inside the Flores house, life felt warmer than it had in years. The mornings were calm, punctuated by laughter from Rose's children and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I had rediscovered the simple pleasures that money couldn't buy: honest companionship, respect, and the comfort of being wanted rather than tolerated. Meanwhile, Michael struggled with the reality of rebuilding. The pressure of financial responsibility weighed heavily on him, and for the first time, he truly understood the value of every dollar. "Dad, I never realized how easy it was to let someone else handle the hard parts," he admitted during one of our evening phone calls. "I always thought wealth was security. Turns out it's only part of it." "You've learned the hard way," I said. "Now it's time to build something lasting, something you actually earned." His wife, Isabella, however, was floundering. The social circles she had once dominated were turning their backs. Invitations ceased, and her once flawless Instagram feed grew silent. She tried subtly reaching out to former friends, but each message received polite deflection, or worse, no reply at all. Her influence had been built on borrowed prestige and the wealth of others, mostly mine, and now, stripped of that support, she was exposed. Cody Jenkins' world crumbled in parallel. Once a respected figure in the Spokane banking community, he found himself isolated. Colleagues whispered behind closed doors, questioning the judgment that had led to his public humiliation. His daughter's Christmas dinner, intended as a display of familial pride, had backfired spectacularly. Professional respect evaporated as quickly as his social standing. Even Catherine, with her cultivated charm and social finesse, couldn't escape the fallout. Her carefully maintained persona of refinement and sophistication, curated through charity luncheons and exclusive events, was now under scrutiny. Those who once admired her began to question the integrity of her family and her values. I continued my quiet life, observing these developments with a sense of calm satisfaction. There was no need for further confrontation. The truth had a way of emerging on its own. My days were filled with meaningful work, time spent with Rosa and her family, and the simple joy of living honestly. Michael's progress was steady but slow. Selling the house had been the first step, but downsizing and adjusting to a smaller budget were humbling experiences. "I feel like I'm finally seeing the world as it really is," he said during one of our visits, "not through the lens of privilege, but through responsibility." "That's the point," I said. "Life teaches you lessons, often the hard way. The sooner you learn them, the sooner you grow." Isabella, desperate to regain control, tried one last manipulation. She sent a series of messages, painting herself as a victim of circumstance, claiming misunderstandings and miscommunication. I ignored them all. She had made her choices, and now the consequences were hers to face. Cody and Catherine faced similar reckoning in public and private. Their social engagements dwindled, invitations disappeared, and whispers replaced polite nods. They had underestimated the power of truth and the consequences of entitlement and deceit. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by, someone who had attended the infamous Christmas dinner. "Dennis, I've been telling everyone about what happened that night. Your composure, the way you handled everything, it was remarkable." I smiled, sipping my coffee. Composure isn't given, it's claimed. People only take it from you if you let them. By March, Michael had adjusted to his new reality. The burden of debt and responsibility had changed him, and slowly he began to rebuild genuine connections with me, with Rosa's family, and with the truth of his own life. Meanwhile, the lessons for Isabella, Cody, and Catherine were ongoing. Life had a way of exposing pretenses, and the more they resisted accountability, the harsher the reality became. Their world, built on appearances and borrowed wealth, was collapsing piece by piece, leaving them with nothing but the bitter taste of hubris and misjudgment. I reflected on the past months, the confrontation, the revelations, and the long path to restoration. Peace was not just about winning, it was about reclaiming control, dignity, and purpose. I had learned to invest in the right things, truth, respect, and meaningful relationships, rather than appearances, false loyalty, or unearned admiration. And in that quiet realization, as spring crept into Spokane with a promise of new beginnings, I finally felt it. Freedom. The weight of 5 wasted years had lifted, leaving only clarity, resolve, and a future I was determined to live on my own terms. Spring sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the Flores living room in soft gold. Birds chirped outside, oblivious to human drama, a world that had moved on while some of us were still catching up. I sat with my coffee, reflecting on the aftermath of that fateful Christmas Eve. The reverberations of truth were still spreading, and I found myself quietly satisfied watching them unfold. Michael had begun to face reality with a seriousness I hadn't seen in years. Selling the house, budgeting for every expense, and confronting the consequences of overspending had humbled him. He called less frequently for money and more often for advice. Life advice, not financial handouts. "Dad, I never realized how much I relied on convenience," he admitted over dinner one evening. "I always thought I was independent, but I wasn't. I was dependent on other people's sacrifice." "You've got it now," I said calmly. "Independence isn't about what you can take. It's about what you're willing to earn and protect yourself." Meanwhile, Isabella's world was unraveling faster than even I had anticipated. Invitations ceased, Instagram likes dwindled, and her social circle, once eager to bask in her curated perfection, started questioning her motives. The posts that had once projected flawless sophistication now looked empty, and the audience that had fueled her ego turned away. Cody Jenkins felt the professional consequences more acutely. His banking connections, previously a source of prestige, became a minefield. Colleagues whispered, wondering how a respected figure could misjudge his own family so publicly. Every lunch meeting, every networking event was now tinged with skepticism. Reputation, once carefully built, was disintegrating. Catherine fared no better. The persona of elegance she cultivated, through charity luncheons, wine tastings, and carefully staged social media, began to crack under scrutiny. Invitations stopped coming. Friends asked uncomfortable questions about the family's integrity. Even casual acquaintances started questioning the judgment of someone who had participated in the manipulation and public shaming of a man who had helped them for years. I continued my quiet life, watching this domino effect unfold without interference. I had no desire to actively torment them. The truth had a way of doing that on its own. Rose's family became my anchor, filling the void of what I had lost with genuine connection, laughter, and shared experiences. Michael's progress was slow but steady. He moved into a smaller home, cut unnecessary expenses, and gradually began to understand the concept of financial responsibility. "I feel like I'm seeing life clearly for the first time," he admitted over dinner one evening. "Not through luxury or convenience, but through actual choices." "That clarity," I said, "is something money alone can't buy. You've earned it now." Isabella's desperation intensified. She sent frantic messages, pleading for reconciliation, claiming misunderstandings and misconceptions. I ignored each one. She had made her choices, now she faced the consequences. The Jenkinses' social decay was visible to anyone paying attention. Parties they had once hosted went unattended. Invitations they once received were now replaced with polite declines. Their connections, once a source of pride, had shifted to awkward distance. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor, a woman who had attended that infamous Christmas dinner. "Dennis," she said quietly, "I've been telling everyone about that night. The way you handled it, it was impressive. You didn't yell, you didn't shame them publicly, you just let the truth speak." I smiled, sipping my coffee. People only respect what they see as genuine. Deception eventually reveals itself. I didn't need to act. They did it for me. By late March, Michael had begun adjusting to his new reality. The burden of responsibility had reshaped him. Slowly he started to rebuild connections with me, with Rosa, and with the truth of his life. Meanwhile, Isabella, Cody, and Catherine were learning lessons the hard way. Their facade had collapsed, leaving them with nothing but the bitter taste of pride and entitlement. Social rejection, professional scrutiny, and public exposure became daily reminders that life had a way of correcting imbalances. I reflected on the months that had passed, the confrontation, the revelations, and the long path to reclamation. True peace, I realized, was not about winning. It was about reclaiming dignity, respect, and purpose. I had learned to invest in things that mattered: truth, integrity, and meaningful relationships. Spring fully arrived in Spokane, carrying a promise of growth, renewal, and new beginnings. I felt lighter, unburdened, and resolute. 5 years of being a doormat were gone, and now the future was mine to shape. Rosa texted me one evening, "Dinner Sunday. The kids want to show you their school projects." I smiled and replied, "Wouldn't miss it." Real family, it turned out, was the family that wanted you there. Everything else was theater, and I was done paying for it.
April in Spokane was crisp and clear. The kind of weather that made you feel alive after a long winter of gray skies and frozen possibilities. I spent my mornings in quiet reflection,
sipping coffee on the back porch, watching the buds emerge on trees, and thinking about the changes that had reshaped the past few months. My life had shifted in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. The chaos of Christmas Eve and its aftermath had yielded clarity, boundaries, and surprisingly, reconciliation, at least cautiously. Michael had called earlier that week, hesitant but sincere. "Dad," he said, voice cracking slightly, "I've been trying to get my life in order. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to rebuild, if you'll let me." I paused, weighing his words carefully. I'd spent years teaching him the lessons the hard way, not out of malice, but out of necessity. "You can rebuild, Michael," I said finally, "but it's going to be slow, and you'll have to earn trust, respect, and understanding, not just expect it." Over the next few weeks, Michael took the first steps. He downsized his home, sold unnecessary assets, and set up a proper budget. I could see the difference in him. A man no longer coddled by convenience or the illusion of entitlement. A man facing reality for the first time in years. He was learning accountability, a lesson that no amount of money could substitute. Meanwhile, Isabella's world continued to crumble. Her frantic attempts to contact me were unanswered, her social life fractured, and her once impressive circle of friends began to distance themselves. The Christmas dinner debacle had left an indelible mark. Even her parents, Cody and Catherine, were navigating the consequences of their reckless pride. Their reputation had been irreparably tarnished among peers, colleagues, and neighbors. It was strange, in a way, to watch them struggle without feeling vindictive. I had no interest in continuing punishment. Justice, I realized, was in the natural consequences they now faced. Pride, entitlement, and deception were being exposed for what they truly were, and that exposure was far more effective than any confrontation I could orchestrate. Rosa and her family became my sanctuary. Their warmth, humor, and genuine connection reminded me of the value of being wanted and appreciated. The kids ran around the yard one afternoon, showing off school projects, laughter echoing through the house. It was a sound of life, of real family, the kind that didn't require financial obligation or social games to validate love. Michael came by that Sunday evening, carrying a small stack of papers. He looked hesitant but determined. "Dad," he said, "I've started tracking every expense, every payment, and I've cut unnecessary costs. I want to prove I can handle this without your help." I nodded, impressed. "Actions speak louder than words, Michael. Show me what you've done, not what you plan to do." He spent the evening going through spreadsheets, bills, and budgets. I offered occasional guidance, but mostly watched, letting him experience the discipline firsthand. There was a transformation happening, not just in his finances, but in his attitude, his humility, and his understanding of respect. Meanwhile, Isabella's desperate attempts to manipulate the narrative continued, but the effect had diminished. Her messages, once urgent and persuasive, were now met with polite indifference, or more often, complete silence. Her control over Michael had weakened, and for the first time he was seeing the truth clearly. Cody and Catherine tried to repair their social standing, but whispers followed them wherever they went. Invitations were replaced with polite excuses. Even casual acquaintances raised eyebrows, questioning how someone could publicly demean a man who had supported their family for years. Their world, carefully curated over decades, was cracking under scrutiny. One evening, Rosa and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You've handled everything with patience and wisdom," she said, softly. "You didn't just fight for yourself. You showed Michael the importance of standing on his own, and you found real family in the process." I smiled, feeling the weight of the past months lift slightly. "It's been a long journey," I admitted. But I've learned that some battles aren't about revenge. They're about teaching, boundaries, and protecting what really matters. By the end of April, the Flores household was a place of growth and rebuilding. Michael was learning responsibility, Isabella was isolated, and Cody and Catherine were facing the fallout of their choices. I had reclaimed my dignity, found joy in genuine relationships, and finally, truly understood the meaning of family. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the backyard. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace it.
May brought longer days and warmer evenings to Spokane, a perfect backdrop for change. For Michael, every sunrise felt like a challenge, a test of whether he could finally live up to the lessons he had ignored for so long. The Christmas confrontation had left its mark, and the foreclosure notice had added weight to his sense of responsibility. There was no going back. He started small. First, he focused on his career, cutting unnecessary expenses and taking on extra projects at work. Michael had always been capable, but complacent. Now he realized talent alone wasn't enough. Discipline, accountability, and foresight were the keys to survival. One evening, he called me. "Dad, I've been thinking. I need to change more than my finances. I've treated people poorly, including you. I want to make amends, not just with money, but with respect, honesty, and actions." I listened quietly, letting him speak. His tone was earnest, almost desperate. There was no pretense, no entitlement, just a man finally confronting the consequences of his choices. "Michael," I said finally, "you're learning. But remember, trust isn't given, it's earned. Words aren't enough. Show me with your actions." He nodded. "I will. Every day." Meanwhile, the Jenkins family was facing the aftermath of their Christmas humiliation. Cody, whose pride had always defined him, was struggling to rebuild relationships within the business community. Invitations to charity events and networking gatherings were replaced with awkward silences and whispered questions. Catherine's carefully curated social persona crumbled under the weight of scrutiny. She found herself questioned at every lunch and social gathering, her elegant image fading with every conversation. But Isabella, however, was the hardest hit. Her dependence on manipulation and charm had left her unprepared for accountability. Her attempts to contact Michael were rebuffed, and my silence toward her messages left her frustrated. Without her husband's protection, her social standing eroded quickly. She realized that her lifestyle had been a fragile construct built on borrowed money and borrowed respect, and now it was collapsing. Michael's transformation was steady but not without struggle. He was learning to budget, to face reality, and to prioritize responsibilities over convenience. There were nights he called, seeking advice on managing debts, and mornings he showed up at my door with progress reports, spreadsheets, and detailed plans for rebuilding his finances. I guided him when necessary, but let him experience the consequences of his choices firsthand. During one visit, he said quietly, "Dad, I never realized how much I relied on you. I took it for granted. Every bit of support, every sacrifice." His voice trembled. "I want to be someone who can stand on his own, not just financially, but as a man who respects himself and others." I nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride for his awareness and effort, sadness for the years lost to entitlement and ignorance. "Michael, it's never too late to start, but the path isn't easy. It's going to take work, patience, and honesty." Outside, the Jenkins family was quietly unraveling. Gossip in Spokane spread quickly, and people began noticing discrepancies in their stories. The charity events Catherine had flaunted in social media posts suddenly seemed hollow. Friends who had admired her sophistication now asked pointed questions. Cody's business reputation, once sterling, was now tinged with doubt and skepticism. At home, Michael and I began talking about the past, not in anger, but in lessons. We discussed choices, boundaries, and the importance of respect. Slowly, a bridge began forming, a tentative connection that acknowledged past mistakes while offering a chance at genuine reconciliation. One evening, Michael arrived with a folder of documents, receipts, statements, and a comprehensive budget plan. He said, "I want you to see I'm serious." I examined the folder, noting the meticulous detail. For the first time, he wasn't relying on excuses. He was taking ownership. By late May, a pattern had emerged. Michael worked during the day, reviewed budgets in the evening, and spent weekends learning about investments, taxes, and financial planning. He was building skills he had neglected, and slowly his confidence returned. Not the arrogant confidence of entitlement, but the quiet assurance of competence. Isabella, on the other hand, remained a shadow of her former self. Without Michael's complicity, she could no longer manipulate situations or people. Social invitations dwindled, and she began to grasp that wealth and image alone couldn't mask character flaws. For the first time in years, I felt the balance tipping. The family I had built around me, real family, grounded in mutual respect and genuine affection, was flourishing. And the lesson Michael was learning, though harsh, was the most important one of all. That respect, integrity, and accountability mattered far more than appearances or borrowed comforts. The sun set over Spokane that evening, casting a warm glow on a city still healing from winter, and on a family slowly healing from betrayal. I poured myself a cup of coffee and watched Michael leave, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Real growth had begun, and for the first time in a long time, it felt sustainable.
June brought heat to Spokane, but inside the Jenkins household, the atmosphere was far from warm. Isabella's world, once glittering with borrowed luxury, had begun to crumble, and she felt it keenly. Without Michael shielding her and without my financial support, the cracks in her carefully constructed life widened rapidly. She woke each morning to reminders of reality, bills she couldn't pay, invitations she could no longer accept, and social circles that now questioned her integrity. For the first time, her followers on social media weren't admiring her posts, they were scrutinizing them, commenting on the glaring discrepancies between her curated image and the truth. Vacation photos taken with money she hadn't earned were now evidence of a lifestyle built on someone else's hard work. Catherine and Cody tried to console her, but even their reassurances sounded hollow. Their own reputations were tarnished after the Christmas confrontation and the exposure of their manipulation. They could offer advice, but they could not shield her anymore. The guests who had attended that fateful dinner remembered the papers, the bank statements, and the truth. Whispers followed her at every social gathering. Michael, on the other hand, was transforming. He worked tirelessly, balancing his job and learning financial literacy. Every call he made, every spreadsheet he prepared, reminded him of the mistakes he'd made in the past. Slowly, he was learning what responsibility truly meant. He now understood the value of money, of respect, and of accountability, lessons that Isabella had yet to grasp. One afternoon, Isabella tried to reach him. She sent a flurry of messages and even called repeatedly. Michael didn't respond. Each ignored call deepened her frustration and sense of isolation. She realized that her influence over him had vanished. No amount of charm, social maneuvering, or manipulation could undo the damage. For the first time, she experienced what it felt like to be powerless. Her parents, Cody and Catherine, were losing patience. "You have to fix this," Cody barked one evening. "Michael needs to respect our family. You need to control him." Isabella's frustration boiled over. "I can't control him. You don't get it. All these years we've relied on Dennis, on his money, and now it's gone. I can't just fix what's already broken." The tension in the house grew unbearable. Catherine, ever the image-conscious matriarch, tried to maintain a facade of control, but even her careful demeanor cracked under scrutiny. At the next charity luncheon, several acquaintances whispered about the Christmas dinner incident.
Catherine felt their stares, their subtle questions, the judgment she had worked so hard to avoid. The life she had curated online now seemed hollow in the real world. Meanwhile, Michael continued to rebuild. Each day he gained confidence in his abilities. He paid bills on time, managed his finances with care, and even started a small side project to invest in property. Isabella's attempts to intervene were futile. She had no leverage, no support, and no one to defend the lies she had relied on so long. By mid-June, Isabella's social calendar had all but evaporated. Friends who once admired her lifestyle now avoided her calls. Invitations to exclusive gatherings stopped coming. Her social media posts no longer earned admiration, they were ignored or subtly criticized. She had underestimated the consequences of deception and the power of truth. One evening, I met Michael for coffee. He shared a surprising detail. Isabella had been calling him non-stop, leaving voicemails full of anger, fear, and frustration. "She's realizing that without me, her world isn't sustainable," he said quietly, "and I'm not going to give her that control back." I nodded, knowing that this was the natural order of consequences, finally catching up. Isabella, once the center of a glittering social world, now faced the reality of her choices. Without her husband's complicity or my financial support, she was forced to confront the truth. Every lavish item she once flaunted now reminded her of what she had lost. Every social invitation she once took for granted now highlighted her isolation. In the quiet of the night, Isabella sat alone, scrolling through posts of her friends, enjoying events she was no longer invited to. Her reflection in the darkened window showed a woman who had relied on charm, manipulation, and borrowed wealth to define herself. The facade had crumbled. She had no one to manipulate, no one to protect her, and no way to reclaim the life she had taken for granted. The downfall was complete, and it was entirely self-inflicted. Meanwhile, Michael thrived on the lessons he had learned, moving steadily toward independence and maturity. Isabella had no choice but to watch, powerless, as the man she once controlled became the man she could no longer influence. That summer, Spokane saw the stark contrast between growth and decline. Michael's life was ascending, grounded in responsibility and respect. Isabella's life was descending, marked by isolation and the harsh reality that privilege and deception could not replace integrity and hard work.
July arrived with long, sun-soaked days, and Spokane seemed almost unaware of the personal storms raging behind closed doors. Michael, now 35, had transformed from a man overshadowed by his wife's family and the comfort of my financial support into someone who finally understood the weight of responsibility. He woke early every morning, brewed his coffee, and spent the first hour meticulously reviewing budgets, bills, and past mistakes. The first step was accepting reality. The mortgage notices, the overdue payments, and the looming foreclosure on the house his family had once called home were no longer things to panic about. They were challenges to solve. He called banks, explained the situation honestly, and began negotiating new payment plans. Each conversation taught him patience, assertiveness, and the importance of owning one's decisions. For once, Michael was accountable, not to his in-laws, not to Isabella, and not to me, but to himself. At work, his focus sharpened. He stayed late, took on new projects, and stopped wasting time on trivial office gossip. Colleagues began noticing his newfound confidence, and slowly, professional respect followed. Michael's bosses were impressed with his diligence, but more importantly, he felt a sense of pride that no amount of money could buy. He had learned the satisfaction of earning his own achievements, of standing on his own 2 feet. Meanwhile, Isabella's grip on her previous social dominance continued to crumble. Her social media posts, once polished and enviable, now revealed desperation and frustration.
Friends who had previously admired her lifestyle avoided her, and invitations to gatherings stopped arriving. She tried to maintain appearances, buying inexpensive imitations of the items she had once flaunted, but the illusion was thin and unconvincing. Every glance in a mirror reminded her that she could no longer rely on borrowed prestige. Michael, undistracted by her attempts to reclaim status, began reclaiming his family relationships. He reconnected with siblings and old friends he had neglected while catering to Isabella's social ambitions. Weekends once spent attending parties and networking events were now filled with genuine connection, laughter, shared meals, and meaningful conversation. Slowly, he understood that life was richer when built on authenticity rather than pretense. One evening, as Michael returned from work, he found a letter slipped under his door. It was the final notice for the house foreclosure, now only days away. But instead of panic, he felt determination. He reviewed his budget, calculated every expense, and realized he could manage the remaining payments with his current income and side projects. For the first time, fear did not dictate his actions, strategy did. He called the bank, negotiated terms, and even found a small investor to help cover a shortfall. That night, he slept with a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in years. Isabella, on the other hand, was unraveling. Her parents tried to intervene, but their guidance was ineffective. She had grown accustomed to control and instant gratification, and now that power was gone. Invitations dried up, friendships faded, and Michael's indifference left her with an acute sense of isolation. She tried to manipulate events, guilt-trip Michael, and even subtly attack him socially, but he remained composed. Every effort backfired, further highlighting her dependence on others for status and approval. Michael's growth extended beyond finances. He started making healthier life choices, regular exercise, balanced meals, and mindful routines. Slowly, his confidence transformed him physically and mentally. The man who had once been overshadowed by his wife's family was now standing taller, thinking clearer, and living with purpose. By late July, Michael had begun documenting his journey. Journals, spreadsheets, and plans filled his desk. He mapped out future investments, career goals, and personal growth milestones. The experiences of the past year, the betrayal, financial strain, and confrontation at Christmas had become the foundation for a life grounded in independence, responsibility, and dignity. As for Isabella, she was a cautionary tale in reverse. The more she clung to old habits, the further she fell. Social events, expensive lunches, and curated online appearances could not shield her from reality. Isolation became her constant companion, and each failed attempt to regain control reminded her of the life she had lost. By the end of July, the contrast between Michael and Isabella was stark. He was rising, learning, earning, and reclaiming his life. She was falling, losing credibility, social standing, and the influence she once wielded. For Michael, the path forward was clear. Build a life rooted in respect, accountability, and true independence. For Isabella, every day was a reminder that life could not be faked, and privileges taken for granted could vanish overnight. Michael had finally broken free from the chains of manipulation and dependency. The man who had once been lost was now firmly on his own path, stronger and wiser than ever before.
August arrived like a harsh wake-up call for Spokane's elite social circles. The summer heat couldn't mask the tension in Isabella's life. Invitations she once received effortlessly now vanished. Her once glamorous Instagram feed, filled with curated vacations, designer clothes, and expensive dinners, now looked like a desperate attempt to hold on to relevance. Every post was scrutinized by friends who had begun noticing cracks in her carefully built facade. Isabella tried everything to maintain control. She reached out to old acquaintances, sent expensive gifts, and even hosted small gatherings, hoping to reclaim her place in the social hierarchy. But the charm had faded. replaced by subtle whispers of criticism. Friends whispered about her arrogance and reliance on Michael's inherited support, while former allies began distancing themselves. Her parents, Cody and Catherine, tried to intervene, but their advice was outdated, ineffective, and often ignored by Isabella herself. She had grown too used to being the center of attention to heed anyone's warning. Meanwhile, Michael's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. The house, once a symbol of financial dependence, had become a place of planning and growth. The foreclosure threat had forced him to confront reality, and in doing so, he had found freedom. He no longer waited for others to dictate his path. Each morning was a structured routine: exercise, meal planning, budgeting, and time devoted to skill building. He picked up side projects, invested in small business ventures, and explored opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. Michael's financial independence gave him a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he felt in control. The constant anxiety, the burden of appeasing others, and the sense of being undervalued had lifted. He realized that independence was more satisfying than wealth funded by others, and the pride in earning his own way became a quiet, unshakable joy. At work, colleagues noticed the shift in him. His once tentative decisions became confident judgments. He no longer avoided challenges or opportunities. Instead, he sought them out. Supervisors praised his initiative, and peers began consulting him for advice. Michael's life was not just returning to normal, it was becoming better than it had ever been. Back in Isabella's world, frustration turned to desperation. She attempted to guilt Michael through messages, calls, and social media posts, but he remained composed. He had learned to detach from toxic manipulation. Each attempt from Isabella only reinforced his understanding that respect and trust were earned, not demanded. Michael had finally drawn boundaries, and he refused to cross them. One evening, Michael received a call from a local community center where he had volunteered in the past. They offered him a leadership role in a new initiative supporting small business owners. He accepted immediately, recognizing it as an opportunity to combine his financial skills with mentoring others. The satisfaction he felt in helping others thrive contrasted sharply with the emptiness he once tolerated in his family life. Isabella, observing Michael's steady rise and increasing confidence, experienced growing panic. Every social post she curated, every event she hosted, failed to match the authentic life Michael was building. Friends who had once admired her lifestyle now looked at her with thinly veiled pity. The carefully constructed world she had relied upon for status and control was collapsing. By mid-August, Michael had fully embraced a life of independence. He had taken responsibility for his finances, career, and personal growth. He celebrated small victories, like paying off overdue bills, completing a successful project, or enjoying genuine social interactions free from manipulation. Each achievement reinforced his confidence, making him resilient to external pressures. Isabella's fall reached its peak when a close family friend, previously loyal to her, subtly called out her dependency on Michael for financial stability. The comments spread quickly through their social circle, leaving her reputation in tatters. Invitations stopped arriving entirely, and even her parents' attempts at intervention felt inadequate. She realized far too late that influence built on borrowed privilege was fragile and temporary. In contrast, Michael's life was expanding. He cultivated genuine friendships, meaningful relationships, and respect in both personal and professional spheres. He no longer needed to rely on superficial appearances or others' approval. The lessons of the past year, the Christmas confrontation, the financial awakening, and the emotional distance from toxic relationships had solidified a man who understood the value of integrity, self-reliance, and authentic connection. By the end of August, the contrast between Michael and Isabella was undeniable.
One had risen through adversity, building a life of independence and purpose. The other had fallen, clinging to illusions and losing influence. For Michael, the path forward was clear, promising, and entirely his own. For Isabella, it was a harsh reminder that privilege without responsibility was fleeting, and control without respect was meaningless. Michael finally understood. The past could not be changed, but the future was his to shape. And for the first time in years, he felt truly free.
September brought a crisp clarity to Spokane, the kind that mirrored Michael's own mental state. The weight of the past 5 years, the manipulation, the lies, the exclusion from family events, was gone. He had learned the hard way that respect and trust could not be demanded, only earned. And more importantly, he had discovered that self-respect and independence were far more valuable than any social approval. Michael's mornings were now a reflection of his growth. He woke early, brewed coffee with care, and reviewed his goals for the day. Each task, whether business-related or personal, carried meaning. He took pride in knowing that every decision he made, every step forward, was entirely his own. No one dictated his priorities or diminished his worth. The sense of freedom was intoxicating, and he savored it. Isabella, by contrast, had become a shadow of her former self. Friends who once admired her lavish lifestyle now spoke in hushed tones about her dependency and arrogance. Invitations stopped arriving. Her social media posts garnered less engagement, and her influence dwindled. She realized too late that status built on the generosity of others was fragile, and control enforced through manipulation was temporary. Every attempt to regain her former prominence failed, leaving her frustrated and isolated. Michael's relationship with his father, Dennis, was flourishing. After the events of Christmas, they had begun to rebuild a genuine bond. No longer defined by financial transactions or societal expectations, their connection was rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and shared values. They met weekly, discussed business ideas, family matters, and even hobbies they had never explored together before. Each visit reinforced Michael's understanding of authentic family and the joy of being valued for who he truly was. With the foreclosure behind him and the lessons learned, Michael turned his attention to long-term plans. He invested in a small startup in Spokane, applying his financial knowledge to create sustainable growth. He mentored younger entrepreneurs, sharing insights he had gained from both his mistakes and his successes. This sense of purpose, helping others navigate challenges he had once faced, filled a void that wealth alone could never satisfy. Isabella's attempts to re-enter Michael's life were met with polite but firm boundaries. He no longer allowed her manipulation or demands to dictate his actions. The sense of control she once held over him had evaporated entirely. He had grown, and her presence no longer had power over his emotions or choices. It was a liberation he savored quietly, free from drama, guilt, or the burden of obligation. Dennis, watching Michael's transformation, felt a profound sense of pride. The man who had once been under the shadow of manipulation was now thriving independently. Michael's growth validated the difficult decisions Dennis had made to assert his own boundaries and demand respect. It was a moment of vindication, but also one of genuine joy as he witnessed his son embrace life on his own terms. As autumn leaves began to fall, Michael's life had reached a new equilibrium. His finances were secure, his career was advancing, and his personal relationships were authentic and fulfilling. The lessons of the past, betrayal, exclusion, and manipulation had forged resilience and wisdom. He no longer feared confrontation, financial responsibility, or standing up for what was right. He had learned that self-worth was not tied to others' approval, and freedom was the most valuable gift one could give oneself. The final chapter of his former life, the one dominated by dependence, exclusion, and family politics, was closed. Michael walked through his home, a place he had now fully earned and maintained, and felt a profound sense of peace. He had reclaimed control over his life, rebuilt his identity, and established boundaries that would protect his future. Spring would come again, and with it, opportunities for new beginnings. Michael had learned that life's challenges, while harsh, could also be transformative. He had discovered that true family were those who valued him, supported him, and treated him with respect. Everything else, no matter how glamorous or imposing, was merely theater. Sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee in hand, Michael reflected on the journey. The past 5 years had been painful, humbling, and at times humiliating, but they had also been instructive. He smiled, not out of revenge or anger, but out of the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had reclaimed his life. He was free, respected, and finally living for himself. The whiskey, once a companion to sorrow, now celebrated triumph. The future, which once uncertain and fraught with tension, now gleamed with possibility. Michael had survived manipulation, exclusion, and deception, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakably independent. For Michael, life was no longer about pleasing others or funding illusions. It was about authenticity, integrity, and the quiet satisfaction of building a life truly his own. And for the first time in years, he felt completely, unequivocally free.